You know, I was thinking that in the book of the law in Deuteronomy, that it was pretty dry reading. But I think we found some that's not so dry tonight. We're going to start off with it before we get started in the book of Ruth. Explain some of what we're going to talk about. If the man refuses to marry his brother's widow, she must go to the town gate and say to the elders assembled there, "My husband refuses to preserve his brother's name in Israel, and he refuses to fulfill his duties as a brother-in-law." The elders of the town will then summon him and talk with him, and if he refuses and says, "I don't want to marry her," the widow must walk over to him in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal from his foot, and spit in his face, and then she must declare, "This is what happens to a man who refuses to provide his brother with children." Ever afterward in Israel, his family will be referred to as the family of the man whose sandal was pulled off. You don't want that.
No.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for loving us. Thank you for your word. Thank you, Father, that you have so much to tell us. And Father, it really depends on whether our ears are ready to hear it yet. I pray, Father, that you prepare both, Father, your message to come forward, Father. You use my voice, use whatever you need to. Use your word on the board. But Father, help our ears to hear what you'd have us to know today. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Did y'all find that an interesting passage? And what does that have to do with anything we're talking about? If you were here last week, we ended chapter 3, and we looked at many things that were going on in chapter 3, but it was basically Ruth made herself known that she was ready to be remarried. And she wanted Boaz to be her kinsman redeemer. And she had a quiet way to let him know. She couldn't be the one asking, but she could let him know that she was open to a proposal. And so did it in the dark, not to be indecent, but to be very decent, so that he could refuse and not feel any pressure from anybody and all those other kind of things. And he wanted to protect her, so he told his workers that, "Don't say that she was here. People think the worst thoughts." But it was actually for the best reasons that was done. And he sent her back with some food from Naomi. And then we get to when Naomi saw how much food was brought back, she said, "Get ready, because he's fixing to take action." And he told her that there was somebody else. There was somebody else who was a closer kinsman redeemer. He didn't have first option to be the kinsman redeemer. And that's what we just talked about in that particular part, the kinsman redeemer. And just a quick review. If a brother died, if you don't know, originally when the land was drawn out, every family got their portion when the land was drawn out. You had, the area of Dan, and the area of Judah, and the area of this, and the area of that. And then they divided that up amongst the families. And that's where you started. And if a brother died or his family died out, then they lost that property. And remember, Naomi's husband has died, and her 2 sons. All the heirs to that property in the husband's name have died. And if there's nobody to come up and take that land, that goes out for bid, or one of the other people gets it. But that family is basically wiped out of the books. So the kinsman redeemer, the brother, is supposed to marry the widow and produce a child. And that child won't get the name of the man who married her. He'll get the name of it has to be a male child, of the person who died. Does that make sense? The firstborn male gets the name of the person who died. And then that keeps that property for that section of the family. If there is nobody else, then the other people get to claim that property. There isn't land available for sale, because it all belongs to those folks. But you basically wipe out, off the record books, someone whose family completely dies out. And that's not what they wanted. So they had the kinsman redeemer set up going. So he told her, "You go on home, you take care of your mother-in-law." And remember, we see Ruth as the Gentile person who meets the Christ-like figure, Boaz, who's the provider. Right? And we see Naomi as basically mother Judah, my mother Israel. Because she's where? She's not working in the fields. He didn't tell the Jewish people to go out and work in the fields. He told the church to go out and work in the fields. My fields are white unto harvest. But she's waiting, and she has no Redeemer, and she really has no hope for a Redeemer because she can't have children anymore. All right, she's beyond childbearing age. So that's the inside story to the story that's going on. Just for the romantic side, though, Boaz is now going to petition the one who is closer, who has the legal claim, the legal opportunity to be the kinsman redeemer and have Ruth as his bride. So that's where we come into chapter 4. Are y'all ready? That's a lot of stuff. Hopefully it'll unwind and unpack it a little more because we talked about it. Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the close relative of whom Boaz had spoken came by. This is such a setup. It's almost funny when you hear it. So Boaz said, "Come aside, friend, sit down here." So he came and sat aside. And he, Boaz, took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, "Sit down here." So they sat down. Would you feel a setup going on? "Hey, buddy, come here, let's talk a minute." And when they said, "Hey, guys, we spoke a little before. This is the guy I was telling you about. Y'all come sit here and listen." So something is up. Okay? Now, the gate in the city, you always see on the fortresses, you just have the gate that opens up. But when you have a city fortress, what's the weakest point in the wall? If an enemy army, these walls are there for a reason. What's the weakest point in the wall if an enemy army is attacking? The gate is. You don't see them banging on a 4-foot wall or 12-foot wall. You see them banging on that front gate, don't you? So the walls that they had in those places, literally, it would get to the place for the gate, and then it would turn back. You'd have a gate here, you'd have a gate here, you'd have soldiers here. So if they made it through that first gate, they were in an ambush area, a kill zone. And if you had visitors coming into town that you didn't want in the city, you want them to do business in that area of the gate, in that little aisle that's coming in. Does that make sense? And that would protect the city. And at night they'd shut it all down. But they basically did a lot of their government business there, so foreigners didn't come in. They could control who went in and out the city. So the gate became like a city hall, place to do business. So that's why the elders would be there. So he has them come. How many elders are there that he gets? 10. Okay, remember that number. He says, "Come aside." It doesn't give the name. It doesn't give the name of this kinsman redeemer, the one who's closer to Abimelech, right, than he is. That was interesting. Sit down. So they sit down. Then he said to the close relative, "Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, sold the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants and the elders of my people. If you will redeem it. But if you will not redeem it, then tell me, that I may know, for there is no one but you to redeem it, and I'm next after you. I'm next in line." A couple of things to know. One, if you were the kinsman redeemer, if you were next in line, it was your obligation, but there was no clock. So you could wait it out. You could decide when to make that decision to redeem it or not. If you were kinsman redeemer, you had to fulfill all the obligations of a kinsman redeemer. And so it might mean marrying Naomi, which in his mind may not be a bad idea. She's beyond childbearing years. The land, she wouldn't have a son for it to go to, so the land would stay in the family. He'd get the land. She could be another housekeeper in the place. May not be a bad idea, right? I mean, that's the kind of things that are there. Or he could just stall until Naomi dies and he's next in line, and then he doesn't have to worry about it. So Boaz is pushing the point. You got to make a decision now. And he's going to do it in such a way that the next in line, the kinsman redeemer, is going to jump at a chance and then realize where he's at. And so look how smooth Boaz is. Now, remember, he's a Christ-like figure. And Jesus is no dummy. And he definitely knows human nature. He made us, right? And so he knows that the guy may go for his greed. more than his kind thought, that the idea for that law about the kinsman redeemer. So, he said, if you redeem it, go ahead. But if you don't, I'm going to get it. Then Boaz says, on the day that you buy the field, let's go back and read verse 4. But I thought to inform you, saying, buy it back in the presence of the inhabitants of the elders. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you do not redeem it, then tell me, and I may know that there's no one but you to redeem it, and I'm next in line. And what did the guy say? I'll do it. The land was hard to come by, and it was all locked up. And so there it was. It was a good deal. You know, somebody went for a quick sale, and he could make some money on that. He says, I'll do it. So he's committed himself in front of who? 10 witnesses. 10 witnesses. That was the legal side of it. It's kind of like having a notary there to be sure that it's done right. Then Boaz said, by the way, you're kinsman redeemer. That means if you're going to take that role of kinsman redeemer, there's no halfway in. You've got to do everything the kinsman redeemer has to do. So he says, on the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also buy it from Ruth the Moabitess, the wife of the dead, to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. In other words, you've got to become someone who Ruth can have a child with to create another heir for our dead brother Elimelech. He hadn't counted on the Moabitess, and he threw in that name Moabitess because they were supposed to be taboo. So, the guy has to think now, man, he was all happy about the land. Well, I go, but wait a minute. I'm doing this for Ruth, and she's got a daughter-in-law who's got a dead heir, so she would have to become my wife, and she's young enough to produce an heir, which may take, I buy the land, there's an heir, he gets it, and I lost my investment, and I'm married to a Moabitess.
So does he have to marry both of them?
No, he can take the other one in and just marry the one who he would have the child with. But that would redeem the whole family. But it still gets a little complicated, though, because you have that extra person. Naomi is not of childbearing years, only that she's the only one who could produce an heir. Ruth would be the only one who could produce an heir. But that would redeem the whole family. We keep the land in the family name, and she would be a part of that family. Naomi would. So that's how it's looked at. Like I say, it's going to get more complicated than that. That the bird guns?
No, that ain't bird gun. That's too rapid.
That's what?
It's too fast. Bird guns don't go off that fast.
It's a bird machine gun.
Yeah, no, they don't go that fast.
It is outside though, right?
Sound like it is. Sound like a ball hit inside the wall. What does it sound like?
Yeah. Anyway, let's continue. So, you have to take the full road. You can't go halfway and just get the cream off the top. You've got to marry the Moabites. Then the close relative said, I can't do that. I mean, he was a good guy as long as he was getting his way, but whenever there's some responsibility and commitment that he doesn't want, and he's taking a chance on losing his wealth, by as soon as his kid's 12 years old or has the bar mitzvah, the land's gone back to Naomi's family and all that. He's not happy with that. He says, I can't redeem it for myself, lest I ruin my own inheritance. In other words, I'm getting rid of wealth. My kids won't have that. So he jumped too fast. But Boaz had him committed. Remember, Boaz says, I'll take care of it tomorrow. He had told Ruth that on the threshing floor. Tomorrow we'll get this worked out. And Naomi said, based on, I think, how much food that he gave. He sent 6 handfuls of barley for him to eat. In other words, he's going to get something done quick because he's our provider. Anyway, I can't redeem it unless I run my own inheritance. You redeem my right of redemption for yourself, for I cannot redeem it. Uh-oh. This guy's fixing to lose a sandal. You see that? And he'll be known as what? The man who had to give up his sandal. The whole family's now going to be. But that's he's fixed because he committed and then he backed out. In front of what? The elders. The ones representing the legal side. Now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming, exchanging to confirm anything. One man took off his sandal and gave it to the other, and this was a confirmation in Israel. Now remember, we've entered into the time of the judges where they do what they think's right in their own mind. What did the law say to do? The woman was to confront a man in a man-dominated world in front of everybody, tell him what a low-down sandal giver he is, right? And spit in his face. Now they just give a sandal. Who do you think changed that rule? The men did. In fact, look at it. Therefore, the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. So he took off his sandal. She didn't yank it off. She didn't spit on it. She wasn't even there. He's just, here, take the sandal and go. Is that weird? A little bit strange? How many of y'all remember that part of the book of Ruth? It's just one of those little things thrown in there. And the background story really helps to bring it out what's going on. It's even going to get bigger than that. And basically what he's saying is, you are going to walk in my place. Here's my sandal. You're going to walk in my place. You're going to take my place as Redeemer. I was going to be, but now you're going to walk in my place. Here's your footwear. So go do that. Just some symbolism going on. So Boaz says to the elders who happened to be sitting there, he'd set that up early, hadn't he? With all the people, you're the witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's, that's Elimelech's two boys, from the hand of Naomi. It's mine now, I'm buying it. It's a done deal. Witnesses are all there. Moreover, how many of y'all use that word very often? Moreover?
All the time.
All the time, okay? Moreover, Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, I have acquired as my wife to perpetuate the name of the dead through his inheritance. So, Ruth and Boaz's firstborn will not be for Boaz. It will be for Mahlon and Elimelech. Now, Elimelech's name means God is the king. That's what Elimelech means, even though he was running from God when he went to Moab. Okay? But hang on to that thought. That the name of the dead may not be cut off from among the brethren. Remember what happens if all the air dies out? They're gone. They're off the books. And from his position at the gate. You are witnesses this day. So he's taken the full role as kinsman redeemer. All the people at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. The Lord make the woman who is coming to your house like Rachel and Leah, the two who built the house of Israel. And may you prosper in Epaphras and be famous in Bethlehem. Epaphras and Bethlehem are the same thing. So they're in Bethlehem when all this is taking place. Okay? So that's what's happening. How many of y'all are utterly confused by all this drama that's just taking place in front? Pretty much. Remember, this is a double or triple story. This, I think, is more double story at this point. Now, who does Boaz represent here? Who does he represent? He's a symbol of who? Of Christ, our Redeemer, kinsman Redeemer, right? And he's going to do what? Redeem Ruth, and by doing that, he's going to take care of Naomi. And so you got the church, and ultimately the Jewish people, right, are going to be. Okay? Here's the tricky one. Who is the kinsman redeemer who said no? And who are those 10 guys behind him? Now, the 10 guys represented what? The legal system of the day. Right? What standard did Jewish people have to meet of that day?
Keep the law.
The law. What are the most famous parts of the law? The 10 Commandments. So who do the 10 guys, elders, represent? The law. And did you notice that the law didn't say a word while he was doing the negotiation? And what did you find out about the kinsman redeemer? What did you find out about him? Was it a good thing for him to turn it down or a shameful thing according to what we read earlier? It was shameful. He could not meet the obligations, the standards of the law. The law can't fix stuff, but he couldn't meet it for a couple of reasons. One, he didn't have enough to do it, and number two, he didn't have the character to do it, did he? And you and I are what? In the same place up against the law. Can we meet the standards of the law? Our character certainly can't. We've all sinned and come short of the glory of God. And so, if Boaz represents Christ and those 10 represent the law, who does that kinsman redeemer represent? Us. Who's the closer kin to Naomi? Us. We can't redeem ourselves. The church can't redeem itself. Did you see that? And so it's a picture of what's coming later. But it's also true for what's happening right then. Okay? And there is a timetable involved. When Jesus calls it, the Father calls it, it's time. That's when it's going to happen. And so all of that is going on in this drama that's taking place. Who bore our shame? That Jesus did. Right? Who walks in our steps so we can have a righteous path? Who substituted themselves for us since we couldn't do it? He did. So all of that stuff about the shoe and stuff starts to kind of make sense. It's just a picture. It's not the actual thing, but it points to what Jesus is going to do later. Just like we said last week, that Naomi at the feet of Jesus while the threshing is going on and the darkness is about and all, the church was where? At the feet of Jesus. But where was the Jewish people? In the dark. Where all the threshing and dividing and stuff is going on. Right? And so we got a picture of the rapture as that goes. How much stuff is in this little story? It's jam-packed, isn't it? All right. So what happens? Something happened. I went back to chapter 3. Okay. All the people who were at the gate, the elders, we're witnesses. The Lord make the woman to you like the house of Rachel and Leah. Rachel and Leah were what? The wives of Jacob. How many sons did they wind up having? We know 12, the 12 tribes right? Yeah, the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's name was changed to Israel in the 12 tribes. So they're saying, may you have many sons. They didn't want poor Boaz to just have one son, and then he loses the land that he just bought. Right? Now think of this. When his first son is born, and it will be, his name will be Obed, he will be, stay with me, he will be the biological child of who? Boaz. But he will be said to be the child of Elimelech, or Mahlon, that family line. The legal heir there. Do we know anybody else like that had a real father, but was known as the son of Joseph? Who was that? Jesus. Do you see how this gets... The plot thickens all the way through that. You're going to see that as it comes through here. The same kind of situation. What obligation did Boaz have to do this for Ruth and Naomi? Zero. So why did he do it? He loved them. He's the right guy. He's doing it out of love. That's his whole idea and understanding. And he can satisfy the law. The 10 elders. Not only can he satisfy them, he doesn't just fulfill the law, he fills it full. And you get that as we read about it. Remember, the people and the elders there beside themselves, look what this guy did. And may you be wonderfully blessed. May you have lots of sons like Leah and Rachel. Right? May the Lord just pull his blessings out on you. And what do we know about Bethlehem? It has to be the same town Jesus was born in. The same time where they said, this is the son of Jesus, but we know it was really the son of God. What was the next name? The Lord is God. God is the King. And so it all just works together in an amazing way. May your house be like the house of Perez, who Tamar bore to Judah, because the offspring which the Lord will give you from this young woman. Boy, we're fixing to open up another can of worms. Are y'all ready? Judah and Tamar. Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law. You remember that? She married his son. As far as we know, she might have been a Gentile. They're not sure. I'll read things both ways. And she might have been a Canaanite. She might have been Jewish. You get arguments on both sides. But she married the oldest son. The oldest son died. Son number 2, the Levite kinsman redeemer, he married. And he did evil. So God took him out. Judah had another son coming up. And when he got of age, guess what? He wouldn't let Tamar have him. Done lost 2 of his sons. Tamar lived in another place and waited for a kinsman redeemer. Meanwhile, she has no prospects for making a living. And by their legal understanding, now, the only way they could get them to marry the person was that shaming thing that they did with the sandal and spit and all that kind of stuff. But Judah is not letting her go there. So do you remember what Tamar did? She pretended to be a prostitute. And she seduced, or whatever you want to call it, made a deal with Judah. And he didn't have anything to pay her, so she took, I think, his staff and something else. And she left. I forget what it was, but I have to go back. It's in there. But she took a couple of things. And then the word got back to him. The gossip got there. Did you know Tamar, your daughter-in-law, is pregnant? What a horrible thing this person is, and all that kind of stuff. And then the consequence for her was to be burned. And so they brought her back, and she said, Judah's judging her, and said, you're to be burned and all that? She said, okay. Just know that the Father is the one who gave me these. And they had a son, and his name was Perez. And he wound up marrying his daughter-in-law. But it was a sordid event that took place. Now we're in verse 12 there. And I want to look at... Well, it's missing. That was the one that I worked on for so long, ladies, before you got there. But basically, it said anybody who married and had a child, illegitimate, out of wedlock, or if they married a Moabitess or an Ammonite, had to wait 10 generations before they could be back in the assembly. Now, kind of keep that in your mind. They had to wait 10 generations before they could be back in the assembly. Starting with Perez being the first one. We're going to read a little bit more about that towards the end of the chapter. But it was a lot about what we just spoken about. Okay. Back to verse 12. So may your house be like the house of Tamar, because Perez became quite a guy. He became an upstanding man, even though he started off with such a tough time. And even though Tamar didn't do the right thing, but she was forced into a bad spot, wasn't a good thing, but that 10-generation curse is on them, on that house. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And he went into her. The Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, a kinsman redeemer. And may his name be famous in Israel. Well, Boaz is very famous in Israel, and so is who he represented, which is Jesus Christ. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is better than 7 sons. Remember, when they came to town, you had 2 widows with nothing going for them. Scared and moving off. But she says, wow, what a daughter-in-law you got. This Moabitess, who would have thunk it? You know, but look what's going on. Better than 7 sons has borne him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom and became a nurse to him. That's not a wet nurse, that she became basically his custodian. Because if he was going to take over for Elimelech and Mahlon, Naomi's family was here, but Ruth has now joined whose family? Boaz's family. She can't be in both families for the name's sake. And so Naomi basically has to raise this new heir. And then Boaz and Ruth would go and have other kids. And of course they stayed close and all that kind of stuff. But that's the way the law divided up. They now have an heir for Elimelech's property in this male son. Also, the neighbor women gave him a name. There is a son born to Naomi. Who bore the son? Ruth did. But because that was the family need of the kinsman redeemer, Naomi gets the son. And they called his name Obed. He became known as Obed. He is the father of Jesse. And Jesse is the father of who? David. Okay? Pretty neat stuff when you get to that point. Okay? Now Obed, you know what that name meant? Servant. Servant. Do you get any more pictures of Jesus coming through here? Now, Boaz represents Jesus because he was the Redeemer who paid the price. That's a picture of Christ. Another picture of Christ in the kingdom years is David, who is going to be the ruling king in the millennial kingdom. That's a picture of Christ as the ruler. One is the suffering Christ who came and gave and bought back his people and all that kind of stuff. And then you have the one who's going to rule later. So you get two pictures of Christ in this one family. And then it does this. Y'all ready? Count with me. Now this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Amminadab. And Abinadab begat Nahshon. Nahshon begat Salmon. Salmon begat Boaz. Boaz begat Obed. Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David. Is that interesting? How long was the curse going to last? 10 generations. Somebody asked me the other day, who wrote the book of Ruth? Well, it's the same one that wrote the book of Judges. And that's going to be Samuel. He wrote 1 Samuel and those others. 2 Samuel, he was dead by most of that. But that's what's going on. And when he's writing this, Saul is king. But Saul is not from the tribe of Judah. And it was known early that the tribe of Judah was going to be the kingly tribe. The tribe of Levi was going to be the priestly tribe. But the kings were going to come out of Judah. And yet Saul was a Benjaminite. And yet when Saul was in power, he didn't want to give up power. That's why he kept throwing spears at David. Okay? And so Samuel is writing this to let them know. And everybody knew David was supposed to be king. They had seen what God had done to him, from Goliath to the warrior that he was, to everything else that he did, the writings, all those things that David did. But Saul writes this, and he throws that genealogy in at the end to say what? The curse is over. The curse has been satisfied. Those who were condemned and under a curse before are now free. Who is it that frees us from the curse? Jesus. You know, one of the Christmas hymns, for as the curse is found, it goes, you know, he talks about that. He got rid of the curse. He's the Redeemer that brought us back and satisfied all those things. And so that curse was lifted, that the law set on, and so that David could be king and go on from there.
Does the 10 generations of curse represent anything? At points in time when the Israelites were...
I don't know how you would fit that in. And remember this too about pictures in the Old Testament. If you're not careful, and many people are not careful with these things, when you show these shadow pictures and all, you can start making the Bible saying this little thing meant all of this over here. You got to be very careful. You've got to look for different things in there and confirm and all that. So, do I have anything, evidences that show that those 10 mean anything other than what it meant here? I think nothing except the fact that the curse was satisfied so far. Okay? It is amazing, though, how God carefully narrated through his writers these stories in the Old Testament to keep pointing towards Jesus. and to point at how things were going to go, and you know, the harvest, the separation, the Jewish people and the Israelites. And think about this too. The church got its Redeemer. You see that picture through Boaz and Ruth. The Gentile, and she got her Redeemer. He got his bride, right? Kept her safe during the threshing time and the time of darkness. Naomi, the Jewish people, is still out there waiting. She's not working in the fields. You agree? She's waiting at the house. Who's the one working in the fields? The fields white under harvest, pay for the laborers. It's Ruth out there doing that. They rejected their Redeemer. They weren't able to go forward with their Redeemer. Naomi's past childbearing years. You get that picture going on. But the church received her Redeemer. Okay. And then what did Naomi and not Naomi, Boaz and Ruth do? They laid that baby on her lap. Right? And that became her future. Right? Now, listen to this. This is something that talks about happening. We've studied this in the Revelation study. At the end, whenever all the wars are going on, just when it looks like Jerusalem is getting overrun by the Antichrist and his armies and all that kind of stuff, Jesus steps in, and this is what he says happens. "And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication, and they will look on me." You see the capital? Is there a capital M on me up there? "Whom they've" what? Pierced. And this is Old Testament, prophesying about what happens at the end of tribulation. They're going to look on me, the one whom they've pierced. Now, who did they pierce? Jesus. "Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son." That baby laying that she didn't think she would ever have, that opportunity to have a future, and all laid in her lap. And he's already come to them once and they rejected him. But now they will find that God's going to take the scales off their eyes and they're going to be able to see that spirit of grace, it said, "and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn." Okay? That's that picture of when the surviving Jewish people after tribulation wake up and they receive their Messiah. Now, would Ruth have ever known the one true God without Naomi? If Naomi hadn't gone, disobeyed and all that kind of stuff, would Ruth have ever known about the one true? She wouldn't. So from the Jewish people, the church found their Messiah, their Redeemer. Right? And at the end of time, basically it's like the church, who has, by the way, been supporting Israel for how long? Since they got back to the homeland, since they got back to Israel, they've been supporting the church has in many, many ways. Even to make it happen that they got back. We read about that where they were scattered and they were brought back after 2,000 years. Impossible, but it happened. And now the Messiah will be back there with them, and they will recognize it. How? They're going to look on the one they pierced, Jesus who they pierced, and as somebody looks for their only son. Remember, Jesus was Jewish, but he's also the Redeemer, and he's the one who has their future. Wow, is that an involved story? 4 short chapters packed with all kinds of stuff. I think the sardine can makers had to go read Ruth to see how to get more sardines into that little can, because there's so much stuff packed in that one little book there. And I find it an extremely uplifting story. Here's one of the reasons I've really enjoyed reading about prophecy these last 2 or 3 years. God's got this. I mean, if God didn't have this, Miss Bonnie, how would you handle the storm and hitting your house and all those other things? How could you handle that if you didn't believe God had this? It would be impossible. And his families make tough decisions that rip us grandparents up all the time. How would we handle it if we didn't know that God had this? And as our nation chooses to go so far away from godly morality and things like that, how would we handle it if we didn't know that God had this? Well, how do we know God has this? He's so intricately woven into his word. It's beyond, who could predict all these things and lay them out so carefully as he did? And it's a love story. What was his motivation? What was Boaz's motivation all the way through there? Love. And it was unconditional love. He called her his daughter. He says, I'm not asking anything back from you. Take all these things. It was Ruth that said, I am available to be your wife. Right? Any thoughts before we close that?